I'm welcoming you and our panelists, Dr. Henry Wang and Ambassador Ischinger, to today's virtual discussion on China, Germany, Europe in an uncertain time, a conversation on the intersection of diplomacy and business. During the next hour, we want to put a focus on the future relationship between China and Germany. Against the background of the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relationship between China and Germany this year in 2022, and Russian President Putin's war against Ukraine with tremendous global economic consequences, one question is whether and how economic ties between the EU and Germany and China will be deepened and under which circumstances. Today's event is co-hosted by the Beijing-based think tank Center for China and Globalization and Agora Strategy Group, a geopolitical business consultancy based in Munich. Most of all, I'm now welcoming our distinguished panelists and speakers, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, founder and honorary chairman of Agora Strategy Group, and Ambassador Ischinger, you've been chairman of the Munich Security Conference for 14 years, until the last Munich Security Conference in February this year. Ambassador Ischinger also served as German ambassador to the United States as well as to the United Kingdom, and was deputy foreign minister in Berlin. And before his appointment to Munich Security Conference, he was also global head of government relations at Allianz SE for 6 years, and is now serving as a supervisory board member in different companies. And the Economist once described you as Germany's best connected former diplomat. Welcome, Ambassador Ischinger. And I'm also welcoming Dr. Henry Wang, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. Furthermore, you're holding different engagements in international institutions. And to give our guests only some examples, you are a steering committee member of the Paris Peace Forum and a member of the Migration Advisory Board of International Organization of Migration of the United Nations. Welcome, Dr. Wang. And for the format, after the introduction, Dr. Wang will lead the discussion with Ambassador Ischinger as a dialogue between you two. And afterwards, all our participants will have the chance to raise your questions towards Dr. Wang and or to Ambassador Ischinger. You can either type in your question already during the event in the chat function or choose the hand-raising function. And starting with the Q&A in about half an hour, you will have the opportunity to switch on your camera and discuss directly with our panelists. And I would also encourage to do so, and for the advantage of a lively and open debate. And I'm now passing over directly to you, Dr. Wang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And it's such a great honor to see Ambassador Ischinger. I know that you just come back from Munich meeting in Washington, and also now come to our this joint event with Agora Strategic Group. So it's really a great occasion to welcome, host these important exchanges. We had the honor of welcome Ambassador Ischinger last year, and also before last year as well. So quite a few occasions, and it was really a great honor to see you again. And as we all know, that you've been leading the Munich Security Conference for 14 years, and has made the Munich Security Conference really very important global player and a global platform, and actually has promoted the peace and the security, for the last 14 years. I remember, last time when we had Munich Security Conference offline, and you were trying to break peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, we were saying we should give you a Nobel Peace Prize maybe sometime for all the great contributions you made. I mean, this is really great. I mean, it become an Oscar of all the security conference, but it's important to not just security, but also all the important global issues, climate change and the pandemic and sustainable development. This is really great. So today, I think, we are having people, attending this event and really concerned about what has been going on for this global development. I know that you just come back from your trip in the U.S. and you have also met Dr. Kissinger, and I saw your tweet on that. And of course, Kissinger is already 99 years old almost, and that's remarkable. And he has been, half a century ago, he has actually, pioneered China-U.S. diplomatic relations. But what I was thinking that, given now the China and EU and Germany have such a strong economic ties that actually since the new Chancellor Scholz come into office, President Xi has already spoke a virtual conference for three times already with your Chancellor. So it shows the importance of these bilateral relations. And of course, I'd like to say that basically since 2016, China and Germany become the largest trading partner for Germany, and also Germany is largest trading partner from EU towards with China. So it's really the intertwine. And in 2020, the German-China trade volume has reached over 200 billions, 210 billion. And then actually last year it's reached 250 billion and increased about 15%. That's incredible. And Germany also has invested the most in China among the EU countries. Over 5,000 German enterprises are operating in China, with almost 10,000 projects invested, almost reached $19 billion US dollars. So it's tremendous relations there, and so probably I would start with Ambassador Ischinger. What do you think about this economic relations between China and the EU and China and Germany, and now with all those new development with the geopolitical tension, with the Ukraine-Russian war, and so how we can really steer through this complex situation and continue, the cooperation as much as we can. I mean, you are the global opinion leader on that, and I'd really like to seek your advice on that. Ambassador Ischinger, please.
All right, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be in this program organized by the Agora Strategy Group with you. We've been partnering for quite a while. You've been a regular participant in Munich and in other events which we've been organizing around the world. And let me start by saying that the Munich Security Conference during my tenure, during these past 14 years, has the Munich Security Conference takes pride in having secured a trustful relationship with the Chinese leadership. I think it is very important that we got, 20 years ago, senior Russian participants in Munich. But I think it was even more important, more recently, to have a regular participation by senior Chinese leaders for obvious reasons. And I'll get back to that in just a second. We are currently living in, I think there's this Chinese saying, we're living in interesting times, which is always meant as an understatement. But before I comment on that, let me just briefly also talk about the Munich Security Conference. It's true, as Jennifer said in the beginning, and as you have just remarked, that I've been running the conference, being responsible for its management for the last 14 years. I just want to make sure that everybody who participates in this program understands that I am now not deserting, I am not escaping. Actually, I'm staying on board. transition which is currently underway means that I'm going from what has been a central management position. In a business enterprise, you would say I'm going from the management level to the supervisory board. And I will stay on with the organization as chair of the foundation board. The Munich Security Conference belongs to a foundation. So I will continue to be personally involved, and in particular with regard to our major partnerships and outreach programs. I was delighted when some years ago the Chinese foreign minister personally took me aside at one of his first appearances in Munich. He took me aside and he said, and I quote from memory, he said, "Ischinger, for China, the Munich Security Conference is important. And this is why I want to assure you that we will always show up with senior spokespersons at your events. China takes this very seriously." I was delighted then, and I continue to be delighted, because when Foreign Minister Wang made this remark, our relationship was untroubled. We seemed at the time to have a perfectly harmonious perspective going forward. Well, at this moment, of course, we live really in interesting times. We don't know when and how a war which is currently ongoing in our neighborhood here in Europe, I'm speaking of Ukraine, how that will end. And we don't know, and we're worried about how this aggression that has occurred, how it will affect the totality of our relationships. And that brings me concretely to the points you raised. You see, one of the immediate lessons which we Germans had to draw from what has been happening in and with Ukraine recently is that we need to confess to ourselves that apparently we were too naive regarding, for example, our energy dependence on Russia. The German mainstream for the last 50 years thought that it was a good idea, in fact, to buy oil and gas from Russia because it was available, it was cheaper, and it appeared to be totally reliable. And that's why we supported, as a government, the building of pipelines, etc., etc. And we thought that because this had worked quite well, even during the difficulties of the Cold War, we thought that this relationship, this energy relationship, was more or less untouchable, and it would not be affected by the turmoils of international conflicts, etc. Well, we now had to learn that it is actually not a good idea to have 30 or 40 or 50% of your energy requirements coming only from one source. We are relearning the lesson, which is a very simple lesson, which all of us have learned. We're relearning the lesson that it's important to diversify your suppliers if you can. And that is, of course, now a very urgent mission regarding our relationship with Russia, because we're being accused by our own public, but certainly by others, that by buying all the Russian gas, we're actually financing Russian aggression against Ukraine. That's a bitter complaint, and we need to get rid of that. Now, why is this important in the relationship with China? It is important because the German business community has, over the last several decades, made itself far more dependent on China than it has ever been on Russia. Major German automobile manufacturers, for example, sell more automobiles today or build more automobiles today in China than anywhere else in the world. 30%, up to 40% or so of their overall activities have to do with China. So there is obviously now a reflection underway, which means that people are trying to figure out what, if anything, might be the lessons that our companies ought to learn from the debacle, from the catastrophe, from the difficulty that the war in Ukraine has created for our relationship with Russia. Do we not need to diversify also with respect to our relationship with China? Is it healthy, or is it going to be a future problem if at least important elements of our business community are so dependent on their relationship with China? In other words, we are not yet in a German or European Chinese crisis, but there is a growing degree of reflection and a growing degree of skepticism whether such extensive dependencies are good. One of the catchwords that everybody who listens to this, to our conversation, is familiar with is deglobalization. Bringing production back home, etc. Personally, I don't think that that works for a country like Germany that is so totally export dependent. But I do understand that political leaders and business leaders are now trying to think hard about ways to reduce their exposure on outside actors, including this important relationship with China. That's the first point I want to make. I want to make a brief second point, which has to do directly, Henry, with Ukraine. When the Chinese foreign minister spoke virtually in February at the Munich Security Conference, I was able to ask him a straightforward question. What about China's support for the territorial integrity, for the sovereignty of Ukraine? And the foreign minister answered affirmatively. He said, yes, of course, China supports territorial integrity of Ukraine, just like as China supports the territorial integrity of all other countries. That's a principle of the UN Charter. The question I'd like to raise is, why has China, I think I know the answer, but I'm asking you, and I'd like to raise this for our discussion. Why has China not decided to climb down from the fence on which it has been sitting in this Ukraine conflict? I understand that China has not taken decisions to provide military supplies, arms to Russia, but China has not used its tremendous power, as far as I can see, to exert a little bit of pressure to influence Russian thinking in terms of ending this war early. My thinking is, and Henry, please tell me if I'm entirely wrong. My thinking is that I cannot imagine that for the Chinese leadership, beginning with President Xi Jinping, the Prime Minister, whom I have had the privilege of meeting a couple of times, I cannot imagine that they feel comfortable about this ongoing war, because all the repercussions that this war is creating and will continue to create are, at least in my understanding, they carry negative consequences for the international order, which is something which China needs to uphold. China has a global outreach, has business connections, economic connections, energy connections around the world. You need order just as much as we do. You are interested in maintaining a functioning United Nations system. You are interested, I hope, just as much as we are in an international system that is rules-based, and that is reliable, and that will provide peace, not conflict, etc. So when I look at the Chinese interests, including Chinese interests in the South China Sea and with respect to Taiwan, etc., I would think that this war conducted by Russia against Ukraine, in Ukraine, can actually not at all be in the Chinese interest. It is strengthening the US global role. It is strengthening NATO. China doesn't like NATO. Many statements have been made by the Chinese leadership about NATO. So my question is, why is China not taking a decision to demonstrate to us in Europe that China is actually on our side, and that China wants peace, and that China will talk to the Russians about the wisdom of ending this war rather sooner than later, in order to go back to business and to go back to a more harmonious relationship. So explain to me why China is not using this opportunity more. I think the Chinese reputation, the perception that China would create of itself among European elites would change quite dramatically if China came across as a power of, conflict resolution rather than sitting on the fence. Sorry for speaking so long, but that's the kind of question that I've been pondering in my own mind, and I've actually been discussing it also with some of my American interlocutors last week when I was, as you said, in the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador Ischinger. Yeah, no, I think you have been raising a tremendous good questions, and of course you're giving a very articulated, very precise of what you thought. I think there's two parts. First, I think that you're absolutely right. The China EU has such a great relation with Germany, and now China and Germany are all both the largest traders, probably Germany, EU, China in Asia. We have a lot of common ground in terms of safeguarding the global trading system, multilateralism, as you mentioned, and also, of course, we want to even promote this comprehensive agreement on investment treaty between China and the EU. So I know that President Xi and President Macron and Chancellor Scholz has mentioned quite a few times they want to accelerate the KAI, a comprehensive agreement on investment to forward. Of course, regarding this Ukrainian issue, you are absolutely right. I mean, you are a great friend of for Mr. Wang. I mean, he actually just broke out at Munich Security Conference in February when you were chairing that meeting. He said very loudly that China respects sovereignty, territorial integrity. Yes. And Ukraine is no exception, any country. So, and actually also applies to China's own interest in this part of the world, that, China doesn't want anybody come to invade or getting any sovereignty, territorial integrity violated. So exactly right. What I think actually, I don't see too much difference. I think there's a lot of international, probably not reading China message correct. But China, President Xi talked to Chancellor Scholz, talked to Macron, talked to President Biden, and even talked to President Putin the next day when the war broke out. President Xi actually sad to see the war broke out in continental Europe, and also would like to see a peaceful end, and also tell every president that violence doesn't work and should not work. So I think that message has been quite clear, that China doesn't favor this war. China respects sovereignty, and Chinese ambassador to Ukraine said we will never attack Ukraine. And also Chinese foreign ministry has said many times that they respect, the sovereignty issue. And President Xi even told President Biden and Chancellor Scholz that China like to work with the international community to mediate and to see a peaceful end of that. And I even wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I said, let's get putting off-ramp. China can help too. So the only difference is China doesn't want to have these sanctions. That's probably the difference. The thing for that is that China, as President Xi told President Biden, China and the U.S. are two largest economies. We will be held responsible for the stake of the global economy, and we don't want to see a recession on top of a pandemic caused by this Ukraine war. Because, for example, 70% of China energy depends on the import, and this energy crisis driven up by this Ukraine war going to cost China billions, if it's not trillions, and also the food crisis. So that's probably the difference. But I think China would like to work with the international community. For example, why not Chancellor Scholz, French President Macron, and Chinese leadership and the U.S. Let's have a new Minsk moment. Let's have a G7, 7-party talks, P5 plus Ukraine plus EU and the UN. I'm glad to see UN Secretary General was in Ukraine and Russian, and the Chinese foreign minister tweeted in favor of Secretary General's visit, and China would like to help. So I think there's a bit of looking at China's stand as, for example, not favor sanction as if China favors Russia. No, China actually has been quite, I think personally, has been quite clear that they don't really like this war. And China, of course, talking about sanctions, there's over 1,000 Chinese companies now being sanctioned by the U.S. on a weekly basis. That's really, I think China was pushed to Russia to some extent. So I think China would really like to work. I think Munich Security Conference could invite 7 parties to talk. And let's have a peaceful way out of that. You can really organize that. Maybe next time we could have a talk in Beijing or something. I mean, you've been just in Washington. So as far as I know, I think China would love to, see a peaceful end on that and not favoring this Russian called special military operation. No, I don't think China is in favor of that.
Great.
Yeah. So again, coming back to our dialogue, Ambassador Ischinger, you've been really the champion for the multilateralism, for this peace and the prosperity building in the last 2 or 3 decades, particularly the last 14 years, and so I know that German and also France has been always trying to seek a bit more European EU independence, strategic independency. I remember 2021 Munich Security Conference. You were hosting that in the stage, and you had the President of Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Angela Merkel. You were there. Dr. Miao, our Munich Security Global Young Leader, actually raised the question to Secretary General there. You were chairing that. So I remember very well. We watched that live. It's such a big impact. But I can say at that time, President Macron and Angela Merkel all mentioned about China. They'd like to cooperate. And also mentioned about strategically, French particularly wants to have a bit more Europe strategic independency. Would this Ukraine war totally change that? And also, as a matter of fact, I remember at the Munich Security Conference we were having there for a few years. CCG has been really very honored to be a partner of the Munich Security Conference. We hear that EU and European countries could be a mediator between China and the US, and we were thinking maybe we could have a tri-party talks and things like that. That EU can really be a little bit different. If you have a different interest, it's definitely not exactly as the US. We don't have any territorial dispute with the US, or we're geopolitically we're so friendly. So how do you think about these trilateral relations that China, US, EU, given you coming back from US, and how we can really work together, and EU can play some positive role in terms of making the 2 parties together. We're having a romance of 3 kingdoms. I mean, in contemporary time. How can we do that? The Munich Security Conference could be a leader for that, you know?
Thank you very much, Henry. That's a great question, a great challenge that you were throwing out. Well, let me give you and I know I should make this very brief because Jennifer is waiting for turning to the other participants for their questions and comments. But let me just offer a very blunt response. My impression has been, and especially since I just spent a few days in the United States speaking to various senators and administration people and so on, I think China and the United States are mutually obsessed with each other. The Americans are obsessed with China, whom they regard as their, historic, current and future rival. And China, in my humble opinion, is of course also being drawn into this voluntarily or being pushed into it by being somewhat obsessed about the United States. Then let me explain what I mean. I think that it is difficult for China, and I appreciate this difficulty. It is difficult for China to take sides to act in this Ukrainian situation in a way that would actually lead us to believe that China is now siding with the United States. That's not what your leadership wishes to create as an international perception. Because of the sanctions which you mentioned and other difficulties and areas of disagreement and conflict between China and the United States, I think personally this is really a pity. I wish, if I had a dream, I would wish that China could think about Ukraine without thinking of the United States. And I wish the United States could follow the advice which Dr. Kissinger has been offering for the last several decades, that the United States must learn to coexist and to cooperate with China and not to seek rivalry and conflict, to minimize rivalry and conflict to the extent possible and to maximize opportunities for cooperation and existence. Unfortunately, the mainstream, as I see it, mainstream opinion in Washington, D.C. seems to go not in the direction of Dr. Kissinger's advice, but seems to go into the direction of, we must put all our strength into this dispute about power and business and influence with China. I wish I could think of a meaningful way that we in Europe could help diffuse these mutual perceptions. And I will certainly use the point you made when we think about how best we can orchestrate our Munich Security Conference activities going forward, because I think this touches one of the most fundamental issues of the international system going forward. No one will be helped. No one's interests will be really served if this US-Chinese rivalry, let me call it rivalry, there are other words for it too, dominates all other considerations. I think we have extremely important other considerations: non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, climate, the Arctic, regional conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere, including, of course, in the Indo-Pacific region, etc. So the need to recreate and reanimate a functioning international order with a UN Security Council that can perform its function and that will not be blocked at every turn of the road is, I think, certainly in our interest, and I hope it's also in the Chinese interest. So there are enormous mutually supportive missions ahead, which I hope can be explored together and used. I will stop here. I would have a few other additional comments, but I think it is now time for Jennifer Pernau to take over the moderation and allow people to ask questions of you, Henry, and if they want also of me. Jennifer, please.
Thank you very much. We are coming to our Q&A session now, and thank you very much so far to Dr. Henry Wang and to Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger for this interesting dialogue. And you already raised a lot of many important questions which are striking at the moment. And we already have a first question by John Gao, and the question goes out to you, Ambassador Ischinger. There are a lot of talks nowadays after the Ukraine war that the US and the EU will impose sanctions on China. And the question is if you think, or if, could it be possible that the US and EU will also put out such sanctions towards China as well, as they thinking about such sanctions towards Russia at the moment? Mentioning the so-called oil embargo.
All right. Well, quite frankly, I have never believed that sanctions are in principle a panacea, an instrument to solve all problems. Sanctions can sometimes be helpful to support certain policy objectives, but sanctions in and of themselves rarely solve the problems. So I think that I'm very skeptical about sanctions between Europe and China. I'm also skeptical about sanctions between the United States and China, because it is obvious if we start slapping sanctions on China, China will have no option but to respond in kind. And I'm not sure that that would serve any purpose. I think the real question behind this sanctions discussion is the question, can we be assured, and that again would be a question to the Chinese leadership, can we be assured that China will not do anything that would weaken our attempt to put maximum pressure on Russia to end this war? Can we be assured that China will not come in as an alternative source, either of income or of material, of weapons, equipment, etc.? Can we be assured that China stays out? This is the minimum required, stays out of this terrible, catastrophic situation in the heart of Europe. And if we get minimum assurance in that respect, I think sanctions should not even be on the agenda. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. We then have a second question going out to you, Dr. Wang, and coming from Benedict Ernst, working at Merck, a pharmaceutical industry. The question is, transferring the experience from Ukraine to possible scenarios for Taiwan, a similar military and economic escalation would be a disaster for world economics, but also for any German investments into mainland China and Taiwan. What can China and Europe do to minimize the risk of such an escalation in Taiwan?
I think that's a question for Henry to respond to. Henry.
Yes, exactly. It goes out to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer and Ambassador Ischinger. And I think this Ukraine war actually has served as a good reminder to everybody. I mean, including the US, EU, and China too. I mean, we see that, if things result into conflict and into the war, it's basically putting the economy and the livelihood of people on hold. And so that anything can be learned from this Ukraine war. That would be really last resort and something that people trying to avoid. So I think that that's why China was really stick on this UN Charter that respects sovereignty, territorial integrity, and no country, even Ukraine, can be an exception. And also, of course, China looks for a comprehensive security arrangement. So that is understand. But I think what has been happening now in this across Taiwan or South China Sea is that we should have more foreign interference into the region, so that let people, country in the region to solve things by themselves. And also another lesson we learned is that maybe we should not really have too much military alliance, like we have NATO expansion, but also we had AUKUS in this region now, Australia, US, and UK, and we had the Quad, India, US, Australia, Japan. So you have all those. If you don't have those military alliance, that is really not, it's going to bring more attention to this. We should have more like ASET, like CPTPP, like AIIB, Asian Infrastructure. So maybe that probably would be a good way to build peace in this region. For example, AIIB, India is the largest recipient. India has a vice president in AIIB, so we should do more of this kind of thing, and we should do deeper on the digital agreement with Asia Pacific. So even actually ASEAN had a big meeting in Washington last week. China Foreign Ministry spokesperson said, Asia Pacific is, welcome all the good initiative, all the things that you can benefit the economic and prosperity. But I mean, that means really business, not on the military front. I think that's something probably I think we should avoid in this part of the world, including Taiwan and South China Sea.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Do you want to add anything to this point?
No, no. I think this stands for itself. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions out there now?
We have one more question, since just 4 hours ago, General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, wrote on Twitter, "Honored to receive the applications for Finland's and Sweden's membership in NATO. This is a good day at a critical time for our security. Your applications are an historic step." So as we know, Secretary General Stoltenberg met this morning with the Swedish and Finnish ambassador, who handed over their application for a NATO membership. And so the question to you, Dr. Henry Wang, is what is China's position regarding the NATO membership of these two countries, and how will China react towards the EU in face of a stronger NATO? Is this something which is important in your eyes from a Chinese perspective?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, that's a question that has been frequently asked these few days. I just took an interview 2 days ago when Finland officially announced it's joined the NATO, and also the Finnish journalist just interviewed me on that. I was telling her that basically China doesn't want to see another Ukraine or any crisis like that. But also we understand what Finnish people is concerned about. And so the best way to really stabilize that is really, let's really resolve this Ukraine crisis as soon as possible. And also, I think that European, EU leadership, and of course, US and NATO should really, maybe in some kind of talks with Russian and really find a structural peace. I don't know if we can have a new Minsk moment, because that's really important. I think we cannot wipe up Russia. I mean, Russia is there; it's a neighbor you cannot move. And now we are talking 1,300 kilometers on NATO's frontier now to the Russian, and it's only 100 some miles to the St. Petersburg. I mean, we don't want to make this world more tension, and that's where China doesn't want to see this tension added on. So I mean, by joining NATO of the Finland and Sweden doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, the roots of the problem is that the conflict between Russia and NATO and the West. And what if UN and of course EU, China, US, can we, including Russia, can we really sit together and really let's sit at the Munich Security Conference and really talk about that and find a way to get out of that. I mean, I say that's the way. Otherwise, you know, by more alliance, I don't think that Russia will go away. I mean, this could even create even bigger problem. So, but I understand the Finnish choice on that because they felt threatened by this Ukraine war. I mean, it's totally understandable. But we don't want to see another Ukraine. That's the bottom line, I think.
Thank you very much. So we have one more question going out to you, Ambassador Ischinger, and it is a further question regarding possible sanctions towards China. And the question is, am I correct to understand what you were recently saying is that as long as China is not supporting Russia with material aspect, there will not be a sanction towards China? But we know US is doing anything they can to contain China. Will EU follow US in this direction? So far the question. What's your opinion on this?
Okay. First, if I may, let me add a word to the earlier question about Finland and Sweden. The historic dimension of this development, as pointed out by Secretary Stoltenberg, needs to be underlined. You see, and I hope that this is also understood, you know, among analysts in China. Sweden has been a neutral country for the last 200 years. And it is a historic departure of huge dimensions for a country that has had this long-standing tradition for several hundred years to change course and now join the alliance. Why would they want to do that? Because there is a threat perception. And quite frankly, I would not agree that it is NATO that's causing, or NATO enlargement that's causing that is at the origin of this current tension and conflict with Russia. The last decision that NATO took to enlarge towards the east in the direction of Russia was actually taken in 2004. That's 18 years ago. And since 2004, the only NATO enlargement decisions that occurred had to do with countries like Croatia, Albania, maybe Montenegro. I cannot imagine that that is of any consequence to the security of the Russian Federation, because it is far away from any direct relationship or border with Russia. So I think the NATO argument does not really carry very far when Russia points out, when Russia tries to justify or explain the motivations behind the unprovoked and totally illegal aggression against a sovereign neighbor, in this case, Ukraine. So this is, of course, sent shockwaves through Europe. My own country, Germany, got rid of most of their classic military equipment over the last 20, 25 years. We declared to ourselves, after achieving unification in 1990, we declared to ourselves, great, we're now only surrounded by friends. Germany has 9 neighbors, all of whom we discovered are now our friends, because they're either in NATO or in the EU or in both, or they happen to be Switzerland, which is also a nice neighbor to have. So we didn't see any military threat anymore at all, and our army was diminished. We spent less and less on defense. So a shockwave has been created recently, if you wish, since 2014, but even more dramatically through the events of the last 2 months. Now, just very briefly to your sanctions question, again, I'm not a friend of sanctions in general, and I understand that the United States is extremely concerned about Chinese activities that might stand in the way of putting more and more and more pressure on Russia in this current war situation. I personally do not believe that there is at this point any argument that I have heard that would justify European Union sanctions against Chinese companies or individuals or whatever. So I hope that this Ukrainian conflict situation is not going to result in additional tensions between us and China. Again, let me repeat that I would hope, I'm very happy to invite everybody to come to Munich next time and try to identify or define a path forward, ending the war, recreating trust and confidence building measures. But this requires the willingness by the Russian leadership to engage. And I think one of the few actors in the international arena who could actually influence the Russian leadership to consider re-engaging with the West is China. So I continue to hold out the hope that not only will we not need to slam sanctions against China, which I think would be totally counterproductive, but I would hope that China would, I repeat myself, would climb down from the fence just a little bit and put a little bit of pressure or talk a little bit more seriously with their friends in Russia. And I think this would be to the advantage, to the benefit of Russia, would be to the benefit of Europe, it would be to the benefit of Ukraine, and would certainly be to the benefit of the reputation of China as a force of good and as a responsible global power that is not only trying to maximize its own interests or the pursuit of its own interests, but that has an ability to consider the global commons, the UN principles like conflict prevention and protecting the global commons. That's what global powers are supposed to do. So I remain an optimist, and we'll do everything to bring in as many Chinese leaders as we can to keep this discussion open and going forward, instead of taking steps that would only serve to antagonize everybody, like sanctions in the Chinese-European relationship. That's the last thing we need.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ischinger. I have one last question going out to you, Dr. Wang, regarding trade and investment ties between Europe and China, and also regarding the development of green energy. And after that, I would like to close with a question to both of you regarding your vision on the future partnership between Germany and China, especially regarding political and economic ties. But first of all, the last question. So as Europe is trying to shift towards green energy and carbon taxing mechanism, how do you think this will impact European-Chinese trade? And how might concerns about climate change be integrated into the economic relationship between both regions? Thinking of or background of this question is also, how can China envision its trade and investment ties with Europe in a tense political atmosphere?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. This is really a fascinating question. I think this has enormous business opportunities between China and EU and Germany. For example, I just a few months ago, I visited the Daimler. They have a new R&D center in Beijing. We invest over 1 billion RMB. It is the first state-of-the-art R&D center for all the clean vehicles, clean energy vehicles production and research. I mean, China now is the largest clean automobile market, and also China has a wind power, the largest solar power producer, and then all those has a great participating of companies from Germany and from European countries. And then, now we're having this energy crisis caused by Ukraine and Russian, this conflict. That's really going to really set us back on more other, polluted fossil energies. So, we have a vital interest, particularly a lot of the technology from European companies can be really beneficial, not only for the Chinese market, but also for German and EU market as well. So I think we have a vested interest of working together. And China and the EU, particularly EU, and given the Paris Accord and the climate change leading position, we can really work together. And I think there's tremendous potential for those 5,000 German companies and the hundreds of thousands of EU companies in China, and also vice versa.
Thank you very much. I think that already kind of included your vision for the future relationship, but maybe in one last sentence before we close this dialogue and this discussion, maybe you can give us an outlook on your personal vision for the relationship between China and Germany politically and also business-wise, in one sentence by you, Dr. Wang, and then afterwards by you, Ambassador Ischinger.
Yeah, thank you. No, I really want to take this opportunity with Ambassador Ischinger. I mean, you are a great promoter and great enhancer of the Munich Security Conference. Played a huge, enormous role. I've been there, witnessed this kind of impact. I really, now you are still on the board of the Munich Security Conference. What's your vision for the future Munich Security Conference? And I hope that China can participate more. Then we can really, now we really need more peace talks now than ever before. I mean, Munich security is going to be even more important in the future. So that will be my last comment. Question also for Master Ischinger. Thank you.
Great. Well, let me put it this way. About 10 years ago, between 2009 and 2012, the Munich Security Conference was quite proud to be the platform, to be the venue of an important development, which was the Russian-American New START negotiations about intercontinental strategic ballistic warheads. And we were able to provide the climate for the reset button to be pushed in 2009 and for the exchange of the ratification documents between Russia and the United States 2 or 3 years later. That was a very positive moment. I am saddened by the fact that during the last conference, for which I personally took, full responsibility in terms of the speakers and the program and the priorities, which was the conference this year, that the Russian government representatives decided to stay away and not come, because 4 days later, they were going to invade their neighboring country. So this very last conference of mine for me was a sad moment, because it was a failure of our attempt to serve as a catalyst for peaceful, conflict resolution efforts. And I hope very much that going forward, we can return to the more positive role that we were able to play a decade ago, that we can help make sure that there will be not the outbreak of military conflicts in the Far East, because I think my fellow Germans need to understand, and this is why they need to be interested in what's going on in China and between China and her neighbors. If there is a conflict that broke out in far away regions of the world, we will be directly affected. We've been most directly affected by this Ukrainian conflict, and we're now learning that poor countries in Africa will be devastated by the fact that their grain grain deliveries from countries like Ukraine will be stopped, will be blocked, are not coming. There will be hunger. There will be all sorts of very serious challenges in terms of poverty and hunger and health going forward. Secondary consequences of this ongoing war in Ukraine. And that is why I hope very much that we can all work together. We as an informal, non-governmental platform, but that we can work with responsible government leaders, China, the United States, Europe, and hopefully at some point in the future again, certainly also with Russia, in order to make sure that we do the right thing and build confidence building measures, engage in arms control and conflict resolution programs, and help people understand each other better. That's the purpose. That's the original purpose of the entire Munich security idea. And I want to close with the point that without active participation by China, by the Chinese leadership and by Chinese thinkers just like Henry, we could not perform this mission at all in the 21st century. So I'm delighted to have this link to China, and we want to build on it going forward. Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you so much, and thank you, Jennifer, for hosting us.
Thank you, Ambassador Ischinger. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists and speakers, Dr. Henry Wang from the Center for China and Globalization, and also thank you very much to Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, former chairman of the Munich Security Conference and also founder and honorary chairman of the Agora Strategy Group, for this lively discussion today, and also for all your encouraging ideas towards our political and also to our business leaders in both countries, Germany and China, as well as the European Union, for further dialogue and for finding solutions and ideas towards all our challenges we are facing today. Thank you very much, and I'm already looking very much forward to a next conversation. And thanks for taking your time. Also to all our participants, thank you very much for for taking part in the discussion. Thank you very much for your questions. And to all of you, have a good day, have a nice week, and please stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Henry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.